And we are now joined on the Voices for Victory podcast by Dr. Jasmine McDonald from Columbia University's Herbert Irving Comprehensive Cancer Center up in New York. Dr. McDonald, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, we are going to talk a lot today about the Stuart Scott Memorial Cancer Research Fund, which funded your grant that you received from the V Foundation, and get into all the important work you're doing. But to start off, I always like to just sort of hear from researchers and get to know them a little bit about the path that led them to where they are today. Can you walk us through sort of the steps you took in your career to end up in the cancer research field?
Well, it definitely wasn't a direct line. And I think that most people will say it wasn't a direct line to research. I was one of those kids that hated school. I mean, I didn't even like kindergarten. I didn't like any aspect. I didn't like being told that I had to play with the blocks and I couldn't color, that I had to share. I hated school. But ironically, I was really good at it. So when I remember being in middle school and saying like, I'm going to be a Babyface, who's one of my favorite artists. I was like, I'm going to sing, I'm going to write songs. And then I wrote a song that was about like ice cream flavors. And I was like, maybe this isn't like for me. Then I went to grad school, like still saying I hate school. This is not for me. Went to grad school at Harvard in Boston. I was like, I'm gonna be a fashion designer. So I don't know how to sew. I'm gonna get a sewing machine and I'm gonna learn to sketch. I sketched. I had these great designs. Couldn't bob the needle of my sewing machine. That dream was dead. So I was like, I really like discovery. I really like asking questions. I really like learning, which is probably the reason why I tried all these different options. And in my lab, the best time I had was coming up with study designs. But a pivotal moment in my graduate career was I worked on schistosomiasis. It's a worm infection, and it's very common in parts of Africa and in China. The problem with schistosomiasis is that you can easily treat it, but you constantly get reinfected. And so also water buffalo, which are the buffalo that are being used for rice paddy farmers, they were causing the rice paddy workers to be constantly reinfected. And so we developed a vaccine for the water buffalo in my lab. Very efficacious, first time ever. And so in my mind, I was like, when are we going to roll this out? And my mentor, my graduate advisor said, we're not. And I said, but we had all these study designs. We did the mice. We did the pilot for the water buffalo. All of this money, why wouldn't we make this into a vaccine? And then he told me, well, for one, nobody's going to admit that schistosomiasis is such a problem in China that it deserves this much money for vaccine production. Number two, the rice paddy farmers aren't going to trust American vaccines, and they're not going to actually give them to the water buffalo because this is their pride. This is the way they make money. They're not going to trust that our vaccine is going to be safe. And so culturally, we can't do it. And through the public health system, we can't do it. And I was just floored. I was like, then why did we do all this? Like, why did we work so hard, so many hours for an actual vaccine that can't be delivered because of cultural and systemic barriers? And so that's when I decided, okay, my calling is in science, but it needs to be in science that touches people. And so I left the bench science and I opted to become a molecular epidemiologist, where I get to ask important questions, but my questions actually touch the people.
It's a fascinating tale of how you got here, because gosh, to think that we lost out on the next female baby face, and we lost out on the next great fashion designer. But look what we got. We got a wonderful cancer researcher who's really making a difference. I think we have to say that's a win for for all of us, right? That this is where you ended up.
Mhm.
The grant that you received from the V Foundation was a V Scholar grant, which I think most of our listeners are familiar with because we've talked to a lot of researchers who've had them before. It helps young researchers get their labs started and really fund innovative ideas and new exciting projects that maybe aren't going to get funding from other places. How important was this V Scholar grant to you?
It was critical. I'm very interested in early onset breast cancer. And so this is cancer that's diagnosed before the age of 45 years. And this is also a cancer that's very aggressive and understudied. But not only that, it's also a cancer that really the research we have for therapeutics and targeted therapies and preventives is not catered to young women's breast cancer. It's catered to postmenopausal breast cancer. It's catered to estrogen receptor positive breast cancer. This is a cancer that has the better outcomes, that's most commonly contracted. Um, it's not catered to young women being diagnosed at an early age with aggressive breast cancers like triple negative breast cancers. There's women, like if you think about early onset, we're talking about women who are in the throes of child rearing. And so I was doing breast cancer research, really engaged in all of breast cancer. Then I was really engaged in looking at windows of susceptibility, like periods of time where the breast tissue is very sensitive to external exposures and can cause a cancer initiation or grow a cancer. Then I had a child, and I was really interested in my risk of developing cancer because every childbirth is associated with an increased risk of developing cancer at 10 years or more. And so I started looking at the literature, like what can I do to reduce my risk as a young woman who's in this period of risk? There wasn't much out there. I could breastfeed, um, but I knew that. A lot of women don't know that. And so I started wondering, like, what is the literature out there for women who do get diagnosed? So, like, what do the doctors tell them? How are they treated? What are the treatments? And I began to discover that they're just treated aggressively because the research isn't there. So with the V Foundation, I've been able to engage in really understanding early onset breast cancer in a way that's novel and understudied. So I look at the tumor microenvironment of women who are diagnosed with postpartum breast cancer. That's those women that are diagnosed within 10 years of a pregnancy. These are women who have young kids. These are women who are in their familial roles faced with a deadly cancer because they're 3 times more likely to have the cancer spread and they also have a higher likelihood to die. So I'm able to look at the different markers that are associated with postpartum breast cancer, looking at the different markers that are within that tissue, and hopefully finding markers that we could use for targeted therapy as well as prevention.
And I think, most researchers we talk to talk about how that more personalized therapy is kind of hopefully where we're headed, right? I think most researchers who I talk to say that's the goal is to be able to have a very personalized treatment for whatever type of cancer someone has. Is that sort of the doors you hope to open with your work? Is that you'd be able to look at a specific type of breast cancer that this woman has and say, here's the exact type of treatment that we have for your specific type of cancer?
And I'm actually thinking even broader, just for women who have early onset breast cancer, that they're not treated as a clump. Like they're treated with like your cancer is different and these are the markers that we've detected and this is how we're going to treat you. And then also one of the features of the study that I'm very grateful for is I'm able to look at breast features as it relates to women who breastfed. So I can actually see, how does breastfeeding impact the tumor microenvironment? And so this is definitely targeted, but not so much. This is like precision medicine in a way that we're really targeting the type of cancer they're getting. Like they're getting cancer at a young age where it's very different than those who are getting cancer like postmenopausally.
So, you not only it was at a V Scholar grant that you received, but it was funded by the Stuart Scott Memorial Cancer Research Fund. And I want to dive into that in a minute, but back in December, we had an event in New York to benefit this fund, and you were one of our featured speakers at a panel that, as I told you before we started recording, has been widely praised by anyone who was there and heard you. It was hosted by Jay Harris from ESPN, and Stuart's daughters were there as well. What was just being a part of that like as an experience for you?
It was amazing. I hadn't been a part of such a collective, joyous, purposeful event like that before, where everyone was on the mission, and it was a mission that directly aligned with my values, which is understanding how to improve cancer outcomes for Black and minority people. And the fact that every single person there had the same goal, had the same passion, and had the same drive as me was incredible. And that's also why I really value getting this foundation award because it is a foundation that's in alignment with my own values and my own goals. Whereas it's really, really hard to get health disparities, to get, these type of understudied s- cancers funded, especially as a young investigator, especially as a Black female young investigator. So it was amazing to see not only everyone being along the same lines, but also really supporting me and my research and having those conversations with women during the cocktail hour about my research. It was just a really beautiful night.
Did you get a chance to talk with Taylor and Sydney, Stewart's daughters, at all at the event? They are amazing ambassadors for the fund, and I wonder if you had a chance to chat with them at all.
Yes, I saw them be right before the event began, and I chatted with them, as well as their mother, and just thanking them for the courage that they've had to make this foundation exist, and also just explaining to them what my research does, and it was a really nice way to connect on a personal level.
And we talked about the purpose of the fund, right? Health disparities and helping find answers to questions that maybe we don't know the answers to yet about why minorities are more affected. You know, Black Americans have a higher death rate from cancer than any other racial group in the U.S., which is why we're funding what we're funding to hopefully change that. You mentioned it here, and you said it in the panel at the event too, that it can be challenging to have disparities research get the funding that it needs. And you said something in that panel, and I encourage everyone to go watch it. We'll drop the YouTube link to it. It's on our YouTube in the podcast description. I encourage everyone to go watch it. Dr. McDonald and Dr. Melody Smith were on the panel. They were fantastic. But you mentioned that you said the Stuart Scott Fund changes the game.
It does.
How does it change the game?
Well, it changes the game, and I think I said it before. It like stiff arms all the naysay. I mean, in my research career, I've been told you shouldn't do health disparities research. It's a bad idea. It's not a productive career choice. I've been told that it was not to my advantage to study Black cancer. I've been in committees that we're judging on who should get grant funding and who should not, where it's been said, well, they don't have a white comparison group in this study of Black cancer. Why do we need that? And so it's just very hard to get funding to study Black cancer. And the V Foundation just validates my research question. It validates my passion. It I've submitted grants where I said, I'm really interested in breastfeeding because Black women are most likely to get breast cancer at a young age, more likely to have the most aggressive subtype, triple negative breast cancer. I really want to study, ways in which we can have some preventive messaging. Breastfeeding's one of them, but Black women are also least likely of all to breastfeed. So let's really understand breastfeeding. And I had a grant reviewer say, but women are supposed to breastfeed. Well, okay, but that's not what I was getting at. I was getting at that there's a cultural occurrence within Black women that they tend to not breastfeed as long. And there's many, 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 many reasons. But you going to a grantsmanship and them saying, well, they're supposed to. Whereas the V Foundation, they stiff armed that and said, no, we're funding this. We're funding this because this is a critical behavioral event that's an individual behavior and it's an individual choice that can impact breast cancer in some way. We do need to know how it impacts. Whether a person chooses to breastfeed or whether they don't, we need to know how that changes the breast architecture for cancer. And so, in my mind, the V Foundation validates that. It allows me to get other funding, especially governmental funding, that's been really hard. Black women are the least likely to be funded for an R01 grant, and especially if you're doing health disparities.
Yeah, no, and I know that's one of the biggest reasons why we're so supportive of the Stuart Scott Memorial Fund. And I think it's now we funded almost $15 million of research in it, and it continues to grow as we move it forward. And I think another aspect of it too is that the fund works to award grants to minority researchers, and you mentioned this, who are less likely to be funded for the work that they're doing. So, not only as a woman who are minorities in the science field most often, anyways, but as a Black woman, how important is it to you to have a young girl who can look and say, "Hey, there's Dr. McDonald doing this awesome work in science. She looks like me. I can do what she does too."
I mean, so I am a very big supporter of the pipeline. Like I am a product of the pipeline. University of Maryland, Baltimore County was where I went to college. I was a Meyerhoff Scholar. I also did Mark U. Star. Even at Harvard, I got a fellowship based off of my intellect and minority status. So when I came to Columbia, one of the things I said is like, we need a pipeline. And so I and my mentor, Mary Beth Terry, in 2015 reinvigorated the CURE program. It's now defunct. It's changed into a different program through NIMHD, which is the National Institute for Minority Health and Disparities. And it's changed to a different program, but our cancer center believed in it so much that they've been supporting it. And we bring in high school students and undergraduates from underrepresented populations or those who are first generation college to get a internship to understand cancer. But what I have found that they also get to discover themselves. So they get to understand, what is it like to be an academician? What is it like to actually go to school forever? And what is the outcome of that? And what is it like to be a minority in those spaces? I've had students come through who never thought about going into research who ended up getting full rides for science into their college. So it means a lot. It means a lot to have someone who you can look up to that looks like you, maybe comes from where you come from, can understand the experiences that you've had, and can talk to you with that knowledge. I wouldn't have stayed in science if I didn't find a Black female mentor. Um, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for her name's Shanita Hughes Halbert. I came out of grad school still thinking like this wasn't for me. I still didn't find where I fit. But Shanita Hughes Halbert, a Black female tenured scientist at the University of Pennsylvania, was doing it.
Well, and I mean, thankfully now the importance on diversity, equity, inclusion, I think across all aspects of business and life is becoming much more something that's upfront and people are talking about more and more, which is just fantastic in all areas. And hopefully we continue to do better and improve. And, having someone like you continue to rise through the ranks too, that someone can look up to you and you can get more people involved in the field is a great thing too. Um, I want to get your opinion on this. I like to ask researchers especially researchers who are, still just kind of getting going and really on the young side of research. What does the future of cancer research and cancer treatment look like to you?
Well, the future of cancer research is definitely going towards precision medicine. It's going towards understanding an individual's genetics, is understanding the tumor itself and what markers it has, but it's also going towards it not being one treatment, one cancer. So, given that you can have the same mutations or epigenetic modifications in cancer for breast, as liver, as lung, there's now going to be this kind of synergy where we say it's not one treatment, one cancer, it's a treatment for this type of phenotype. And so I think we'll have more opportunity to have diverse drugs that are used across different types of cancers. And that's why precision medicine is so important, especially when it comes to understanding the tumor environment. Because the more we understand the tumor environment, the more we can understand how they're similar, not just how they're different. So I think that that's one thing. Also, with precision medicine, it's the individual. One thing that scares me about precision medicine is how is it going to play out for minorities? So there's the disparities conversation, and it's like, okay, well, why isn't everything a disparity? Like, why isn't every single disease you see a disparity? For example, a Black person that gets pancreatic cancer and a white person that gets pancreatic cancer has the same mortality expectations. And that's because there's nothing you can do. There's nothing you can do. Pancreatic cancer is a very aggressive, deadly cancer, and there's nothing you can do. Disparities exist when there is something you can do. So the reason that there is breast cancer disparities, prostate cancer disparities, these are all cancers where there's prevention methods, there's screening methods. And once there's that, there's disparity, there's inequity. And so I embrace precision medicine, and it is the future, and it is the way that people are going to get the drugs they need without the toxic effects. It's going to be tailored. But what does that mean for minorities?
So I know this is it's certainly not an easy answer. It's very complicated, of course, but what are the steps we need to take to start um, making you and others feel more confident that as we continue to move forward down the path of precision medicine, we can start to see these disparities shrink in many cases?
Well, it's going to take everybody. It's going to take, from the minority side, it's going to take us participating in clinical trials. It's going to take us participating in research studies. And then from the non minority side, it's going to take more emphasis on getting those populations. The more diverse your genetic pool is, the easier it will be to make sure you're finding the variants you need for different populations. Right now, most of what we know is based off of white populations, which is fine because we're not that different, right, genetically. But there are different variants. We have, and that's what we need to think about. You know, there may be variants that are within those who have a high degree of Black ancestry. And I didn't say Black, I'm not talking about race as a social construct. I'm talking about ancestry as a biological construct. But there may be variants within those who have more Black ancestry or those that have more, let's say, Asian ancestry that are important to consider when we're thinking about these personalized treatments. It's going to take both sides to really get involved.
And I know you mentioned the participation in clinical trials, which is of course an issue, and that's where we funded a grant through the Stuart Scott Fund with, I believe her name is Dr. Lee at the University of Chicago. I hope I'm not butchering that, but working on how can we get more minorities to feel comfortable participating in clinical trials, because as you said, we need that data to make our clinical trials more diverse, and that'll help answer some of these questions. So the Stuart Scott Fund, hopefully, working on some of those issues already as well. Dr. McDonald, the last question I want to ask you before I let you get out of here is, what would victory over cancer look like to you?
Survivorship and thriving in that survivorship. We all age. That's just the nature of things. And as we age, our DNA makes errors that we can't correct. So, can we annihilate cancer in a way that no one will ever get cancer? I don't know. But can we be diagnosed and it be not a big thing? Because there's drugs and prevention and life after a diagnosis, and you get to live your full life. So to me, victory over cancer is being diagnosed and immediately knowing you're going to survive.
Something we can strive for sure as we continue to move forward. And if we keep funding wonderfully talented researchers like you, Dr. McDonald, we're going to get there sooner than later. Thank you so much for taking a few minutes to chat with us today. We really appreciate it. Best of luck in your continued work. I know you're going to continue to do amazing things in the field, and hopefully we'll have you back on sometime to chat again.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I really appreciate the invitation.